I never imagined my 68th birthday would find me standing in front of a rusted garage door clutching a single suitcase and the key that felt heavier than lead in my trembling hand. The night air smelled of damp concrete and motor oil, the kind of industrial scent that clings to your clothes long after you leave. Every time I blinked, I could still see Jonathan's face, my only son, hard and unyielding as he told me that the penthouse was his now. His voice rang in my ears like a cruel echo. "You're just a useless old woman, Mom. What would you even do with a real inheritance?" Dad knew that. Before we dive into true revenge stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. Those words had gutted me far deeper than the will reading earlier that morning. For 42 years of marriage, I had stood by Robert through his career changes, through his health struggles, through raising Jonathan together. I had believed that in the end, our years of devotion would mean security, stability, and some measure of dignity. But inside the lawyer's office, reality had collapsed. Jonathan had been awarded the penthouse and investment portfolio with a smug little nod, while I received the deed to a forgotten garage in the industrial district. I can still remember the quick squeeze of Jonathan's hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was supposed to look comforting, but felt more like a grip of control. By evening, any illusion of kindness was gone. He set my suitcase down by the penthouse door and said with the same tone he might use to dismiss an employee that I should find somewhere else to stay. When I whispered that this was my home, the one Robert and I had built together, his eyes went cold. "It's mine now." Dad made that perfectly clear. He barely let me catch my breath before suggesting I stay with Aunt Helen or in the garage his father had left me. He laughed when he said it, a short, sharp sound I had never heard from him before. That laugh followed me down the elevator and out into the dark city streets. Hours later, after driving aimlessly with tears clouding my vision, I finally found the address written on the envelope the attorney had given me. The streetlights in this part of the city flickered weakly, casting long shadows across shuttered warehouses and cracked sidewalks. 1420 Industrial Parkway looked like every other abandoned property on the block, windows grimy paint peeling the heavy padlock, corroded from years of neglect. This was my birthday gift, my inheritance. I stood there shivering, wondering if Jonathan had been right. Maybe I was nothing but a burden too old to matter, but something inside me resisted that thought. My hand shook as I slid the unfamiliar key into the lock. For a long moment, I couldn't push the door open. It felt like I was about to cross into a final humiliation proof that my husband had left me nothing of value. Still, I forced myself to push. The hinges screamed in protest as the door swung inward, the stale air rushing out like the breath of a tomb. I raised the small flashlight I had brought and let the beam cut into the darkness. The floor was clean, too clean for a place that should have been abandoned. Dust rose in glittering motes, but beneath it lay a smooth, polished surface. My breath caught when the beam slid across a shape at the far end of the garage, a long, sleek curve under a fitted cloth cover, then another and another, 3 of them lined up side by side. I took a tentative step inside, the sound of my shoes echoing in the cavernous space. The cloth nearest to me had slipped just enough to reveal a gleaming front grille. My heart lurched. Even with my limited knowledge, I recognized the unmistakable shine of polished chrome, the elegant curve that screamed of a vintage car, something out of a James Bond film Robert used to love. This couldn't be right. This couldn't be what he left me. The air pressed heavy around me, filled with equal parts dread and anticipation. Was this a cruel joke, some forgotten relics of junk? Or had Robert hidden something here all along, something he never trusted anyone else to know? My hand reached out instinctively, fingers brushing the edge of the cover. The fabric was soft, custom-fitted, not the kind of tarp you'd throw over old tools. My knees weakened as realization began to bloom in my chest. I lowered the flashlight, staring into the darkness beyond the covers, and whispered into the silence, "Robert, what on earth have you done?" Before I reveal what was really hiding beneath those covers, I want to ask you, because stories like this aren't just about me. They're about all of us. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love knowing where in the world you are because it reminds me that these true revenge stories connect people across oceans and continents. And as for me, I was only just beginning to understand the secret my husband had left behind and why Jonathan's cruel dismissal might turn out to be the greatest mistake of his life. The soft fabric slipped through my fingers as I pulled the cover back a little farther, just enough to let the flashlight spill across the smooth silver body beneath. My heart raced in disbelief. I didn't know much about cars, but I had seen enough James Bond movies with Robert to recognize that grille. Aston Martin. A DB something, perhaps. A car worth far more than anything an ordinary garage should hold. My knees wobbled, forcing me to steady myself on the leather bench pushed against the wall. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. For a few precious seconds, I let myself wonder if maybe, just maybe, Robert hadn't forgotten me after all. But then the memory of the lawyer's office came back in a rush, cutting through the fragile hope like a blade. That sterile room with its polished wooden shelves and the faint smell of old paper. My black funeral dress, still creased from the service 3 weeks earlier. Jonathan sitting tall beside me in his perfectly tailored navy suit, the picture of composure, though I could see the gleam of expectation in his eyes. Mr. Hoffman, our family attorney for decades, had looked uncomfortable as he shuffled through the pages of Robert's will. His throat cleared too often, his glasses slid down his nose as though they were trying to escape the moment. He began with what seemed like reassurance. Everything is legally binding and in accordance with Mr. Campbell's instructions. Looking back, those words should have been the warning. The phrases that followed blurred together, but some cut straight through. To my son, Jonathan Campbell, I leave our penthouse residence in Los Angeles and my primary investment portfolio. To my beloved wife, Susan Campbell, I leave the property located at 1420 Industrial Parkway. The garage and its contents. The garage. The words rang hollow in the silent office, and my heart sank. 42 years of marriage, and my reward was a run-down property in an industrial zone. Jonathan's expression changed in an instant, the grief mask dropping to reveal something closer to triumph. He squeezed my shoulder hard enough to bruise, leaning close so only I could hear, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll make sure you're taken care of." It wasn't reassurance. It was possession. I had sat frozen, unable to speak, unable to process why Robert would do such a thing. Surely there was some mistake, some hidden clause. But the lawyer closed the folder with finality, and Jonathan stood to shake his hand, his confidence radiating like a neon sign. The ride back to the penthouse was a blur. I watched the city lights smear across the car windows, my mind spinning. When we arrived, Jonathan carried my suitcase inside with the efficiency of a man executing a plan already decided. He didn't even let me sit before setting it down by the door. "I think it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay, Mom," he said matter-of-factly. I stared at him, bewildered. "What do you mean?" "This is my home." He shook his head, his voice turning cold. "It's mine now. The will is clear." Panic rose in my chest. "But where am I supposed to go?" He shrugged, the gesture careless. "Stay with Aunt Helen for a while. Or better yet, why not move into that garage Dad left you? I can't imagine what you'll do with it." "Open a mechanic shop at your age?" Then he laughed. Cruel, sharp, dismissive. That laugh shattered something inside me. For years, I had excused Jonathan's arrogance as stress ambition, the pressures of business. But in that moment, I saw the truth. My son had no respect for me, no care for my well-being. To him, I was just an obstacle to be moved aside. I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. "At least give me time. You can't expect me to leave tonight." He cut me off, his voice harsh. "Dad made everything clear. This penthouse is mine. Don't drag it out, Mom. You're just a useless old woman." Dad knew it. The words hollowed me out. I left with my suitcase and my purse, the key Mr. Hoffman had handed me, feeling like a cruel joke in my palm. I drove aimlessly until the city blurred into unfamiliar streets, and I found myself staring at the decrepit garage Robert had supposedly left me. And now, standing inside it, I realized there was more here than Jonathan or I had imagined. This was no abandoned dump. Someone had taken meticulous care investing in climate-control polished floors, secure locks. Robert's hand was everywhere in the precision of it. But why? Why keep such a secret from me? Why leave me this instead of our home? I looked back at the gleaming grill, then at the two other covered shapes waiting like sentinels in the dark. My husband had left me a puzzle one that Jonathan would never think worth solving. My breath came in shallow bursts as I whispered to the shadows, "Robert, what were you hiding from me all these years?" Little did I know this was only the first page of the real inheritance story, and the true revelation was yet to come. I stood frozen in the middle of that cavernous garage, my flashlight beam darting nervously across the shapes looming in front of me. 3 cars each, shrouded like sleeping giants beneath custom-fitted covers. I pulled the fabric fully from the first one, the Aston Martin DB5, and the sight nearly stole my breath. Silver birch paint glistened as though the car had rolled out of the factory just yesterday, not 6 decades ago. The smooth chrome, the leather interior visible through the glass, it was perfection. "Robert," I whispered, running a trembling hand across the cool surface. "What were you doing?" For 42 years, my husband had never mentioned a passion for cars. He drove us in practical sedans, always more concerned with reliability than prestige. He had shown no signs of a secret life as a collector, no late-night auctions, no visits to private dealerships. And yet here in a garage that looked abandoned from the outside stood a car worth more than I could fathom. I moved to the next shape, my pulse pounding. With cautious fingers, I tugged the second cover free, revealing a 1956 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing, its deep blue paint gleaming under the flashlight. Even someone as uneducated about automobiles as I was could see it was a treasure. The gullwing doors arched upward in a design so elegant it looked more like sculpture than machinery. The chrome accents sparkled, catching the light like stars scattered across the surface. By the time I reached the third car, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. The final cover slipped away to reveal a Ferrari 275 GTB4 painted in a rich, dark red that instantly reminded me of the wine Robert used to order on our anniversaries. The lines of the car seemed to ripple with power, even as it sat motionless, a predator at rest. Beside it stood a polished wooden stand holding a plaque with detailed provenance papers tucked neatly into a leather portfolio. I swallowed hard, fighting to steady my breathing. These weren't dusty relics. They were museum-quality, meticulously preserved works of art, and I had no idea why my husband had hidden them from me. It was then I noticed the envelope taped carefully to the wall by the light switch. My name was written across the front in Robert's unmistakable handwriting. The sight of it sent a jolt through me, and suddenly my legs felt weak. I peeled it from the wall and flipped the switch, flooding the garage with soft white light from modern LED fixtures recessed in the ceiling. The space transformed before my eyes. What had seemed shadowy and foreboding was revealed as a sanctuary. Climate control units hummed quietly in the corners. The floor was polished epoxy gleaming like glass. Security cameras were mounted high along the walls. A leather bench sat neatly against one side next to storage cabinets labeled with precision. This was no abandoned garage. It was a temple carefully designed to preserve something of enormous value. Clutching the envelope to my chest, I sank onto the bench. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside pages of Robert's familiar stationery slid into my lap. The first line made my throat close. "My dearest Susan, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have discovered what I came to think of as my final gift to you." I pressed the paper to my lips, tears clouding my eyes before I forced myself to continue. He apologized for the secrecy, explaining that 6 years earlier he had been diagnosed with progressive heart failure. The doctors had given him 5 years. He had managed 6, but he had known his time was limited. Instead of frightening me with the truth, he had chosen to quietly prepare. "I know you are wondering why I left the penthouse to Jonathan and only this garage to you," the letter continued. "I struggled with that decision more than you know, but I feared what Jonathan might do if I left everything to both of you jointly. I've seen the way he dismisses you, the way he believes he knows best. I couldn't risk him controlling your life after I was gone." My tears fell so quickly I could hardly read, blurring the ink. Robert had noticed the very moments I had tried to hide the sharp tone in Jonathan's voice when he thought his father wasn't listening, the way he brushed off my opinions as though they were irrelevant. What Jonathan believes is the valuable inheritance, the penthouse, the visible investments are nothing compared to what you see before you now. These 3 cars alone are worth over $12 million. In the safe behind our photo from Venice, you'll find documentation for properties, accounts, and trusts that have all been placed in your name. Enough for you to live comfortably independently for the rest of your life. The letter grew heavier in my hands, the weight of love and foresight almost unbearable. He had thought of everything, not only the finances, but my dignity, my freedom. Perhaps if Jonathan shows you kindness and true responsibility, you may one day choose to share some of this with him. But if he reveals only greed and cruelty, then let this wealth be your shield. Live your life beholden to no one. I pressed the final page to my chest and sobbed. After all these years, after the betrayal of my own son, Robert had given me more than money. He had given me the chance to stand tall again. As I wiped my eyes, I lifted my gaze to the photo of us in Venice hanging near the office door. Our anniversary trip. Our laughter frozen in time. Slowly, I rose and approached it, heart pounding at what might lie behind. And that was when I realized my husband had not left me with nothing. He had left me with everything. The photo from Venice had always been one of my favorites, Robert and I laughing on the Rialto Bridge as a street musician played the kind of carefree joy you can never stage. Now standing alone in that secret garage, I lifted the frame with trembling hands. It was heavier than it looked. My pulse quickened as I turned it over and saw the faint outline of a steel panel embedded in the wall. A safe, exactly as Robert had promised in his letter. For a moment, I hesitated. Opening it felt like stepping into a future I wasn't ready to face, a future without Robert by my side. But I forced myself to focus, whispering the numbers I knew by heart, our anniversary date. The dial clicked into place, and with a soft mechanical release, the door swung open. Inside lay a thick portfolio and several USB drives neatly labeled in Robert's precise handwriting. The smell of paper and metal hit me strangely comforting, like a library crossed with an office. My eyes fell on the first page of the portfolio, Estate of Robert Campbell Complete Asset Inventory for Susan Campbell. I sank onto the leather bench again and opened it. The columns of numbers and property descriptions blurred at first, but as I blinked away tears, the magnitude of what Robert had built began to sink in. Apartment buildings in Seattle, commercial properties in Chicago, a small vineyard in Northern California, stock portfolios and bonds diversified across industries. My head spun as I flipped through page after page, each entry meticulously documented. At the bottom of one page was a total valuation that made my ears ring. Tens of millions, more money than I had ever imagined hidden away under my very nose. Robert had been quietly building an empire not for himself, not even for Jonathan, but for me. But it was the next section that made me stop breathing. A deed to a modest stone cottage in Carmel, fully furnished and purchased 4 years ago. Photos were clipped to the page, sunlit rooms, a garden framed by cypress trees, a view of the ocean between the branches. I covered my mouth with both hands, tears spilling again. Carmel had always been our favorite escape, a place we visited when we wanted peace from the noise of the city. Robert had remembered every detail. He hadn't just thought of finances. He had thought of me, my heart, my comfort, my sense of home. The letter had hinted at freedom, but this was more than freedom. This was belonging. I reached back into the safe and found smaller envelopes tucked beneath the portfolio. Banking details, instructions for transferring accounts, contact lists for trusted advisors. Each one was labeled with calm practicality, as though Robert had sat here carefully imagining the day I would discover them. His handwriting, always so steady, carried across the pages, like his voice speaking directly into my ear. For a long time, I just sat there, the safe door open, the hum of the climate control system, the only sound. I thought about the contrast between this quiet revelation and the cruelty of Jonathan's laughter just hours before. He had thrown me out of the penthouse with no thought for my dignity, assuming I had nothing left. Yet here I was, surrounded by a fortune he didn't even know existed. I closed the portfolio gently and whispered into the stillness. "You planned it all, Robert. You saw what I couldn't. The USB drives gleamed under the fluorescent lights, each one labeled with categories: investments, properties, personal letters. I didn't have the courage yet to explore them all, but I knew I would in time. For now it was enough to know that I wasn't powerless. I rose and looked again at the 3 cars lined in a perfect row. They were dazzling, yes, but they were only the beginning. The true inheritance was the independence Robert had secured for me. No longer would I have to beg for space in my own home or endure the dismissive sneer of a son drunk on entitlement. I wiped my cheeks, closed the safe, and replaced the photo on the wall. My hands steadied as I clicked the lock shut. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt more than grief. I felt resolve. Tomorrow I would go to Carmel. I would step inside the cottage Robert had prepared, the home he had chosen for me with such care. And for the first time in weeks, I would begin to imagine a future not defined by loss, but by possibility. The garage that Jonathan mocked as worthless was in truth the doorway to a new life, and I intended to walk through it. The road curved along the coastline, the Pacific stretching endlessly on my right, a shifting canvas of blues and silvers under the late afternoon sun. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, Robert's portfolio resting on the passenger seat like a sacred text. The farther I drove from Los Angeles, the lighter my chest began to feel, as if the weight of Jonathan's cruelty loosened with every mile between us. When I finally turned onto the narrow lane marked Cypress Hollow Road, my breath caught. There it was, the cottage. Robert's hidden gift. The stone exterior glowed warmly in the golden light, ivy trailing up its walls like delicate lace. A wooden gate creaked gently in the breeze, opening to a garden overflowing with lavender, rosemary, and roses. I parked in the gravel drive, turned off the engine, and sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the waves crashing faintly in the distance. My legs trembled as I stepped out of the car. The scent of salt and blooming lavender enveloped me, wrapping around me like a long-forgotten embrace. I fumbled with the key Robert had left in the safe, and when the lock finally clicked open, I pushed the door slowly. Inside, sunlight spilled through wide windows, dancing across polished oak floors. Every detail felt touched by Robert's hand. The kitchen gleamed with copper pots hanging neatly on a rack. A vase of dried hydrangeas stood on the dining table, their color muted but still graceful. In the living room, a stone fireplace anchored the space, and on the mantel rested a framed photo of us on our 25th anniversary, smiling with wind-blown hair. My knees buckled and I sank onto the nearest chair. He had thought of everything. The cabinets were stocked with dishes, the linen closet full of blankets that smelled faintly of cedar. Even my favorite tea set, the porcelain one with faded blue flowers, sat carefully in a glass-fronted hutch. Tears streamed down my cheeks. Robert hadn't simply left me a house. He had built me a refuge. I wandered room to room, my hand brushing walls and furniture like I was touching him. In the bedroom, a quilt I recognized from our old guest room lay folded neatly on the bed. On the nightstand sat a small leather journal with my initials embossed on the cover. Inside the first page held Robert's handwriting. "This cottage is where I hope you find peace, my love. Let it be your beginning, not your end." The sob that escaped me was raw, unrestrained. For the first time since his funeral, my tears weren't only grief, they were gratitude. A knock startled me. I wiped my face quickly and went to the door. Standing there was a woman in her 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes behind square glasses. She wore a straw hat, tilted slightly askew, and carried a basket of lemons. "Hello, dear," she said warmly. "You must be Susan. I'm Margaret next door." She gestured toward a cottage partly hidden by cypress trees. "Robert spoke of you often." My chest tightened. "You knew," she smiled, setting the basket in my hands. "Not everything, but enough. He came here often the past few years, fixing things, making sure it would be perfect for you. Said it was his secret project." I bit my lip, holding back another wave of tears. That sounds like him. Margaret's gaze softened. "He wanted you to have a place where no one could hurt you. And I suppose now that's exactly what this is." Her words sank deep. I invited her in, and soon we were sitting at the kitchen table sipping tea. Margaret told me about the small Carmel community, how neighbors looked out for one another, how the rhythm of the sea dictated life more than the bustle of the city. She had lived there 20 years, a retired teacher who now spent her days gardening and writing poetry. "You'll like it here," she said with certainty. "It's a place where broken things can mend." That night after she left, I stood on the back porch watching the sun sink into the ocean. The sky blazed with orange and purple, the air cool and salty. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Robert had given me more than wealth. He had given me a chance to breathe again, to belong somewhere untouched by Jonathan's greed. But even as calm settled over me, a shadow lingered in the back of my mind. Jonathan thought I had nothing. Sooner or later he would realize his mistake. And when he did, I needed to be ready. For a while, life in Carmel felt like a dream I wasn't ready to wake from. The ocean breeze through the windows each morning, Margaret's knock on the door, with fresh lemons or muffins, the quiet evenings, spent journaling in Robert's leather-bound book. But peace has a way of stirring envy when greed lurks nearby. Jonathan's calls started less than 2 weeks after I moved. The first rang late at night. His tone was forced too casual. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. How's the garage?" He spat the word like it tasted bitter. I kept my voice calm. "It's fine, Jonathan. More than fine, actually." A pause. I imagined his jaw tightening. "Well, I just want to make sure you're comfortable. You don't have much, so if you need me to sell it for you, I could—" "No," I cut him off. "I'm managing." The silence on the line was sharp enough to slice skin. He muttered something about meetings and hung up. I knew then that suspicion had been planted. In Los Angeles, Jonathan paced his penthouse with growing unease. At first he had basked in his new wealth, inviting colleagues over, showing off the city views. But whispers reached him, an old friend of Robert's casually mentioning that his father had been investing heavily in collectibles, a business contact hinting that Robert's portfolio wasn't fully disclosed. Jonathan laughed it off in public, but privately the words gnawed at him. One evening, after too many glasses of whiskey, he tore through the study, yanking open drawers, rifling through files Robert had left behind. He found nothing but utility bills and neatly balanced ledgers. The absence itself was suspicious. Robert had been thorough, meticulous. There should have been more. Jonathan remembered the garage the way I had clutched the key like it mattered. He pictured me standing in that dusty space alone, and something inside him whispered, "You're missing something. She knows more than she's saying." The next morning, he hired a private investigator. 3 days later, Jonathan sat in his office, the investigator's report spread across his desk. Grainy photos showed me driving up the California coast. Receipts proved I had stopped for gas groceries, and finally that I had checked utilities under my name at a small address in Carmel. Jonathan's pulse quickened. As he flipped to the last page, a property deed listing Robert Campbell as the owner of a cottage on Cypress Hollow Road, transferred quietly years earlier. He leaned back in his chair, anger tightening his chest. So that's where she's hiding. By the time he slammed his phone onto the desk, he had already made his decision. He would confront me. Back in Carmel, I tried to hold on to the calm. Margaret noticed my unease. One afternoon as we walked the garden path, she said gently, "You're bracing yourself." "For what?" I hesitated, then confessed. "Jonathan. He won't leave me alone. I can feel it." Margaret's eyes sharpened with protective wisdom. "If he comes here, you stand firm. This is your home." Robert wanted it that way. Her words steadied me, but dread coiled deep in my stomach. That night I sat by the fireplace. Robert's letter spread on my lap. I reread his line about Jonathan. "If he reveals only greed and cruelty, let this wealth be your shield." The knock came 3 days later, hard, sharp. Through the glass pane of the front door, I saw him, Jonathan, in his tailored suit, despite the coastal chill, his eyes dark with something more than exhaustion. Suspicion had curdled into determination. "Mom," he called, his voice deceptively smooth, "open the door. We need to talk." The ocean roared in the distance as if echoing the storm that was about to break. The knock rattled the cottage door again, harder this time. My hand trembled on the brass handle, but I forced myself to breathe. Robert's words echoed in my mind, "Let this wealth be your shield." Slowly, I opened the door. Jonathan stood framed against the evening sky, the salt air tugging at his perfect suit. His eyes flicked past me, scanning the cottage interior with thinly veiled calculation. When he finally looked at me, his smile was sharp and insincere. "Nice place," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Funny you didn't mention this little getaway." I closed the door quietly, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "It wasn't mine to mention until recently." He turned slowly, arms crossed. "So it's true. Dad bought this for you. And the garage, what's really in there?" "Mom?" His tone was accusatory, as though I were a thief caught red-handed. My back straightened. "Your father left me what he believed I needed. That's all you need to know." Jonathan's laugh was hollow, the sound of entitlement dressed up as charm. "Come on, don't play games. I know Dad. He wouldn't leave me scraps while you get the good stuff. He must have hidden something and you're sitting on it." I studied him. My son the boy. I once rocked to sleep now. A man whose greed hardened every feature of his face. "Scraps. He left you the penthouse, the portfolio. He gave you more than enough. That penthouse is nothing without liquidity," Jonathan snapped. "The market's tightening, the investments are tied up," and he cut himself off, realizing he had revealed more than intended. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I need access, Mom. If you really loved me, you'd share whatever you're hoarding." I flinched at the word hoarding. My lips trembled before I forced them into firmness. "Love doesn't mean surrendering to greed. Your father wanted me secure, Jonathan. He knew you might do exactly this." For a moment his mask slipped. Rage flickered in his eyes, raw and ugly. "So you're admitting it. There's more. You're hiding something." I folded my arms, standing between him and the mantel where Robert's journal rested. "Yes, I'm hiding something, my dignity, and I won't let you strip it from me the way you stripped me of my home." The silence between us stretched thick and suffocating. His jaw worked as if chewing on words too bitter to swallow. Finally he sneered. "You think you can keep me out? Your old mom? Alone? All it takes is one signature from you in the wrong place, and I'll have control. You'll see." Anger surged through me, hot and clean. "No, Jonathan. What you'll see is a mother who won't be bullied anymore. I may be older, but I am not powerless. And you will not take from me what your father gave with love." His face twisted, caught between disbelief and fury. For a moment I thought he might strike the table or worse, but instead he grabbed his jacket and stormed toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back, his words dripping venom. "This isn't over. You'll regret keeping secrets from me." The door slammed, the sound echoing through the cottage like a gunshot. My knees weakened, but I refused to collapse. Instead, I walked to the fireplace, lifted Robert's journal, and held it close. My body shook, but my spirit stood tall. Outside, I heard Jonathan's car engine roar to life, the tires spitting gravel as he sped down Cypress Hollow Road. The ocean roared in the distance, as if warning me that the storm was only beginning. I sank into the armchair, heart still pounding. For the first time, I saw clearly Jonathan wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. And desperate men did reckless things. Robert had built this refuge to protect me, but it was also a battlefield now. If Jonathan came back, he wouldn't come with words alone. He would come to take, and I needed to be ready. Jonathan's Mercedes slid into the underground garage of the penthouse tower with a squeal of tires. He killed the engine, but the growl inside him didn't stop. The confrontation at the cottage replayed in his mind on a cruel loop, my refusal, my defiance, the way I had stood taller than I had in years. That image stung more than any insult. His own mother, the woman he thought fragile, had dared to challenge him. Upstairs, he poured 2 fingers of bourbon and stared out across the glittering Los Angeles skyline. But the view no longer comforted him. The penthouse felt smaller, the walls tighter, as if the very city conspired to remind him that for all his show of wealth, he didn't truly control it. His father had known. His father had set him up with crumbs while feeding me the feast. Jonathan slammed the glass down, amber liquid spilling across polished marble. "No more," he muttered. The next morning he called his attorney. "I want everything," he said without preamble. "The garage, the cottage, whatever she's sitting on. Find a loophole contest that will claim undue influence. I don't care how. Just make it happen." The attorney hesitated. "Jonathan, your father's documents are ironclad. Contesting would draw attention. Courts don't look kindly on sons pushing out widows. It could backfire. Jonathan's voice dropped into a growl. "Then make it look clean. I'll pay whatever it takes." When he hung up, the frustration hadn't eased. Legal avenues were too slow, too public. He needed another path, someone discreet. That night, in a dim back booth of a downtown bar, Jonathan met with Marcus Doyle, an old fraternity brother who had since become a fixer of sorts, part investigator, part intimidator, part shadow. Marcus listened, sipping his beer slowly, his sharp eyes never leaving Jonathan's face. "So you want leverage," Marcus finally said. "Something that makes Mommy dearest fold without dragging us into court." Jonathan smirked. "Exactly. She's hiding millions, Marcus. Cars, properties, God knows what else. I just need her scared enough to sign over control. No bruises. Nothing that leaves me exposed. Just pressure." Marcus leaned back, the neon light glinting off his scarred cheek. "Pressure can be arranged. People slip, secrets leak. Maybe we plant something: unpaid taxes, shady transfers. Make her look unstable. If she's painted as unfit, you become the responsible heir." The idea curled into Jonathan's mind like smoke, dark and enticing. "Do it. Whatever it costs, I'll cover it." But as Marcus outlined possible tactics: surveillance, financial sabotage, quiet intimidation. A flicker of unease stirred in Jonathan. It wasn't morality. That had long eroded. It was fear of Robert's foresight. His father had always been 3 steps ahead. What if the garage held not just wealth, but proof? What if hidden documents could crush any move he made? That thought burned him worse than the bourbon. He couldn't allow me to keep the upper hand. In the days that followed, Jonathan's mask in public remained flawless. Polished speeches, perfect smiles, the grieving son carrying his father's legacy. But behind closed doors, his apartment became a war room. Documents littered his desk. Marcus delivered surveillance photos of me walking Carmel's shore, sipping tea on the porch with Margaret, living quietly, as though nothing had happened. Each image enraged him further. "She looks content." Jonathan spat one night, slamming the photos down. "That's weakness. She should be desperate." Marcus shrugged. "Or she knows something you don't." The words pierced deeper than intended. Jonathan's mind spiraled. What if Robert had told me everything? What if I controlled far more than the cottage and the garage? What if my silence was not ignorance but strategy? That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, fury boiling into obsession. I wasn't just his mother anymore. I was an opponent, a barrier standing between him and the empire he believed was rightfully his. By dawn, he had decided. The legal path would continue quietly in the background, but the real plan would be darker, sharper. He would break me not by law, but by fear. He picked up his phone, texting Marcus just 2 words: "Apply pressure." The battle lines had been drawn, though only one of us knew it yet. And while I rested in Carmel, believing the cottage walls could shield me, Jonathan was already sharpening the knives of betrayal, preparing to strike in shadows his father had always feared. At first I thought it was nothing, just the ordinary noises of a coastal town, the crunch of tires on gravel, the hush of the tide, the murmur of neighbors heading home at dusk. But soon, the patterns became too precise to ignore. A black SUV parked across the street every other evening, its tinted windows reflecting the glow of my porch light. The same man lingered too long at the corner cafe, his eyes skimming a newspaper, but darting up each time I passed. Even the garden gate rattled one night, though the wind was still. I tried to brush it off as nerves. After all, grief sharpens the imagination. But when Margaret came by one morning carrying a basket of fresh bread, her brow was furrowed. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" she asked quietly, glancing toward the road. I froze, the denial catching in my throat. "What do you mean?" "That car," she whispered. "It's been there at least 3 nights this week, and the man with the leather jacket. He's no tourist. He's watching Susan." The breadbasket trembled slightly in her hands. Margaret wasn't one to scare easily. For 20 years she had lived in Carmel, and she knew every face. If she said something was wrong, it was. My chest tightened. "Jonathan," I breathed. She set the basket firmly on the counter. "You told me he wouldn't let go. Well, this is proof. You need to be careful." That evening I pulled the curtains earlier than usual. The soft ocean light still lingered outside, but I couldn't bear the thought of unseen eyes peering in. I sat by the fire with Robert's journal open, tracing his words for strength. yet every creak of the cottage, every rustle outside made me flinch. At midnight, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, just beyond the garden. I gripped the poker from the fireplace, my pulse hammering. The steps stopped near the porch, then retreated. When I finally dared peek through the curtain, I caught the taillights of the black SUV disappearing into the night. The next morning, Margaret found me pale and sleepless. She insisted we walk to the cliff path together, where the salt air might clear my head. The sea stretched infinite and calm gulls wheeling overhead, but neither of us spoke much. When we returned, a folded note was wedged under my front door. In bold letters it read, "You can't hide forever." My hands shook so badly the paper slipped to the floor. Margaret's face hardened. "This isn't just intimidation. It's a message." I swallowed hard. "He wants me afraid." "And are you?" she asked. "Yes," I admitted, "but fear doesn't mean surrender." Margaret touched my arm, her grip firm. "Then don't give him what he wants. If he's circling you, need to be smarter, stronger. And you're not alone, Susan. I won't let him swallow you whole." Her words steadied me, but the unease lingered long after she left. I paced the rooms of the cottage, every shadow suddenly suspect. Robert's safe held millions in documents and deeds, but none of it felt as valuable in that moment as the sense of safety Jonathan was trying to steal. That night I locked every door, twice bolted the windows, and placed Robert's journal under my pillow. Sleep came in restless waves, filled with dreams of footsteps chasing me through endless corridors. By dawn, I knew the truth. Jonathan wasn't just suspicious anymore. He had set his net, and I was already inside it. The cottage by the sea was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a battlefield. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped neatly through the slot of the cottage door. At first glance, it looked official, thick paper, embossed seal, the cold precision of legal typeface. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Notice of intent to contest will. Jonathan's name leapt from the page, wrapped in the language of accusation. Undue influence, concealment of assets, questionable capacity. Each phrase stabbed like a knife. He was claiming Robert's mind had been compromised, that I had manipulated him into leaving me more than my share. My throat closed. After 42 years of marriage, after every sacrifice, every quiet loyalty, I was being painted as a fraud. I called the attorney Robert had recommended in his portfolio. Mr. Whitaker spoke calmly but firmly. "This is a scare tactic, Mrs. Campbell. The will is airtight. Your husband prepared it carefully." "But Jonathan," I whispered. "Yes," he said. "Your son is trying to bleed you through fear. He hopes you'll cave before it reaches a courtroom." "Don't." His assurance helped, but unease still gnawed at me. The legal letter wasn't the only weapon Jonathan had drawn. Within a week, whispers began weaving through Carmel's tight-knit community. At the cafe, conversations hushed when I entered. At the grocer's, glances lingered too long. I overheard one woman murmur, "Isn't she the widow who cheated her own son?" They say the husband hid money offshore. The lies spread like oil, slick on water, staining everything. Even Margaret, steady as stone, admitted she'd heard the rumors. "They're saying you swindled Jonathan," she told me grimly. "He's poisoning the well, Susan." I clenched my fists. "He wants me isolated." Margaret's eyes flashed. "Then you hold your head higher. Let him choke on his own poison." But Jonathan wasn't finished. Bank letters followed routine transactions, suddenly flagged accounts, frozen pending verification. My credit card was inexplicably declined at the pharmacy. Calls to institutions were met with polite stonewalls. "We're reviewing irregularities." I could almost hear Jonathan's voice in the background, whispering suspicions into the right ears, tightening the noose. One evening, after a long walk on the beach, meant to calm my nerves, I returned to find an envelope pinned to my front gate. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message, "Sell the cottage. Sign over the garage, or the courts will eat you alive." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I sank onto the porch steps, the ocean wind whipping my hair. For the first time, exhaustion pressed heavier than resolve. Was this what Robert had feared, that Jonathan's greed would metastasize into cruelty? Margaret found me there minutes later, pale and shaking. She took the note, read it, and her jaw tightened. "This isn't just legal pressure anymore. This is harassment," I whispered. "He won't stop, not until he has everything." She crouched beside me, gripping my hands. "Then don't let him. Remember, Robert didn't just leave you wealth, he left you wisdom. He knew Jonathan's games. That's why he set up the safe, the trusts, the documentation. Use them." Her words lit a small flame in the darkness. Jonathan was tightening the siege, yes, but Robert had fortified my defenses long before. That night I sat by the fire and spread Robert's portfolio across the table. Page after page of careful planning. Trusts structured to bypass challenges. Properties secured under my name alone. Contingency clauses ironclad against manipulation. Jonathan thought fear would weaken me. But as the flames flickered across Robert's handwriting, I felt my resolve harden. Let him spread lies. Let him throw lawyers and bankers at me. I would not fold. Because this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about dignity, about love honored, and promises kept. And if Jonathan wanted a war, then war he would have. The courthouse in Monterey smelled of varnish and nerves, that mixture of old wood and anticipation that clings to every legal battle. I sat at the petitioner's table, my heart steady despite the storm Jonathan had unleashed. Across from me, he looked immaculate as always, tailored suit, perfect tie, but beneath the polish, I saw the cracks, the tightness in his jaw, the flicker of unease when he caught my gaze. His lawyer rose first, weaving a story laced with venom. Mrs. Campbell manipulated her late husband during his final years. She isolated him, coerced him into hiding assets, and cut my client out of his rightful inheritance. Each word was meant to stab, to paint me as a schemer. Once such accusations might have shattered me, but Robert had prepared me better than Jonathan realized. When my attorney, Patricia Winters, stood, her voice cut like glass. "The evidence will show not only that Robert Campbell's estate plan was valid, but that it was designed with deliberate foresight to protect his widow from the very behavior his son now demonstrates." Patricia laid the first exhibit on the table, Robert's handwritten letters pages that trembled with both love and clarity. The courtroom leaned in as she read aloud his words. "I feared what Jonathan might do if left unchecked. These assets are secured in trusts to ensure Susan's independence." Jonathan shifted in his seat, his confidence faltering. Next came the portfolios, the safe's documents cataloging every property, every investment, every car with pristine provenance. Patricia displayed notarized contracts, third-party appraisals, detailed maintenance records, all evidence of years of meticulous planning. "This was no last-minute manipulation," Patricia continued. "This was a 6-year project involving independent advisors, dealers, and attorneys. Mr. Campbell's mind was not clouded. It was sharper than ever." Then came the witness. At my request, Marcus Weatherby Roberts' trusted dealer had flown in from London. Distinguished and composed, he testified to Robert's unwavering clarity. He selected each acquisition, personally discussed long-term strategy, and spoke often of ensuring his wife's protection. His son's involvement, he said, would only compromise the plan. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. I watched Jonathan's face harden, his mask cracking, as credibility slipped away. But the final blow came not from Marcus, nor even from Patricia. It came from Robert himself. We produced a video file from one of the USB drives in the safe. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, Robert thinner, paler than I remembered, but his eyes steady, his voice strong. "My dearest Susan," he began, then turned to the camera. "And Jonathan, should you ever see this, I've made my decisions not out of spite, but necessity. Susan will need independence. You, Jonathan, need a mirror. If you choose to honor her, perhaps she will share what I leave. If you choose greed, then the fault is yours, not mine." Gasps echoed in the chamber. I pressed my hand to my lips, tears stinging my eyes. Even from the grave, Robert stood beside me, shielding me. Jonathan shot to his feet, his voice shaking. "This is outrageous." He was delusional. But the judge raised a hand. "Enough, Mr. Campbell." The clarity of this evidence speaks for itself. The gavel's strike felt like thunder. The will stands. Contest dismissed, cost to be borne by the petitioner. Relief swept over me, but more than relief, there was triumph. not the gloating kind, but the vindication of truth revealed. Outside reporters swarmed their questions sharp. Jonathan tried to push past, but the whispers had changed now. Greedy son, manipulative heir, mother's dignity preserved. The tide had turned. As I stepped into the sunlight, Margaret waiting with open arms. I finally exhaled. Robert's foresight had not only protected me, it had exposed Jonathan's hunger for what it was. And in that moment, I realized this battle had never been about money. It was about respect, legacy, and the strength to fight back when underestimated. For the first time, I felt the weight of true victory. The coastal breeze in Carmel carried the faint scent of salt and jasmine as I walked through the garden Robert had so carefully designed for me. Months had passed since the courtroom battle. Months since Jonathan's furious attempts to strip me of my dignity had been crushed beneath the weight of Robert's meticulous planning. The garage that once seemed a cruel joke had revealed itself to be a sanctuary, a fortress and a mirror reflecting the truth about who my son had become. Yet here in this cottage by the sea, I had found not only safety, but clarity. Jonathan had faded from my daily life. His calls came less frequently, no longer laced with entitlement, but with a hesitant politeness that felt strange on his tongue. The courts had silenced his legal war, the community had quieted the rumors, and even his pride had bent under the weight of undeniable truth. Still, I knew the real battle was not in the courtroom or the whispers of neighbors. It was in the soul of a son who had chosen greed over gratitude, image over substance. One morning, as the sun painted the Pacific in molten gold, I sat by the stone fireplace with Robert's Bible open on my lap. My eyes rested on Proverbs 13:22. A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. The verse struck me like lightning, for it explained what had unfolded with haunting precision. Robert had left Jonathan the appearance of wealth, the penthouse, the portfolio that looked impressive but demanded responsibility. Jonathan's reckless pride had devoured it, and yet Robert's hidden treasure, protected in secrecy, had flowed to me not because I schemed, but because I was the one who needed safeguarding. In the end, the sinner's wealth squandered through arrogance circled back to the one willing to honor it. It reminded me of an old Western proverb, too, you reap what you sow. Robert had sown foresight and love, and I reaped stability. I had sown patience and dignity, and I reaped respect and peace. Jonathan, blinded by ambition, had sown contempt, and in return, he reaped emptiness. The justice of it all was not loud or dramatic, but steady like the tide reclaiming the shore one wave at a time. I thought back to that cruel night when Jonathan shoved my suitcase into my hands, calling me a useless old woman. He believed the garage key represented rejection, that the door it opened was nothing but a symbol of my diminished worth. But it was Jonathan's arrogance, not Robert's will, that made me homeless that night. And it was Robert's faith, his secret labor of love, that proved my value was greater than Jonathan ever imagined. This, I realized, was one of those true revenge stories, not with fists or fire, but with patience, wisdom, and the quiet justice of character revealed. In Carmel, the seasons shifted gently. The garden bloomed with roses Robert never saw, but that I tended with hands steadied by his memory. The neighbors became friends, people who saw me not as a victim of betrayal, but as a woman who had endured and rebuilt. Margaret often visited carrying casseroles or stories of her own widowhood, and together we found comfort in shared resilience. Slowly, the ache of loss gave way to gratitude for the love that had outlived death. When Jonathan appeared again months later, it was not with lawyers or threats, but with hesitation in his step and uncertainty in his eyes. He stood at the garden gate like a boy again, stripped of his armor, holding no papers, no claims. For the first time in years, I saw not the ruthless executive, but my son flawed, broken, yet perhaps capable of change. We spoke of small things that day, avoiding the jagged edges of the past. I did not grant him immediate forgiveness, but I offered him something better, a chance to grow. Just as Robert had wished the inheritance was more than money, it was a mirror. Whether Jonathan could face what it showed was his own journey now. As for me, I no longer measured my worth in penthouses or portfolios. I measured it in the strength I had found when abandoned in the peace of this cottage, in the love that still whispered through Robert's carefully chosen words. The Aston Martin gleamed in the garage, not just a car, but a symbol that I was far from useless. I had value, I had power, and I had a future shaped not by Jonathan's contempt, but by Robert's enduring faith. So tonight, as I sit by the window seat overlooking the ocean, I want to turn to you, the one listening, the one who perhaps knows what it feels like to be underestimated, discarded, or betrayed by those you should have been able to trust. What would you do if the very people meant to protect you tried to erase you instead? Would you crumble, or would you rise patient and steadfast, knowing that true justice often arrives quietly in its own time? This story, my story, may sound extraordinary, but the lesson is simple and timeless. You truly do reap what you sow. Jonathan sowed pride and reaped loss. Robert sowed love and reaped my security. And I once dismissed as useless sowed dignity and reaped freedom. Remember this as you reflect on the tale you've just heard. These are not just tales of inheritance and betrayal. These are true revenge stories, the kind that prove justice does not always roar like thunder. Sometimes it whispers like the ocean at dusk, steady, unstoppable, and undeniable. So before we close, let me ask you, where are you watching from tonight? Share your city, your country, your corner of the world in the comments below. Because stories like this remind us we are all connected by the struggles we endure, the dignity we fight to keep, and the lessons we pass down. And don't forget, like, share, and subscribe so these stories continue to reach hearts across the globe. Together we keep alive the wisdom that character is destiny, that you reap what you sow, and that even in betrayal there can be victory. And as the waves crash against the Carmel shore, I whisper one last truth to Robert's memory. You were right.